I have always known Desert Falcon as an underappreciated Zaxxon-style Atari 7800 launch title. So when I first read that there was a 2600 version out there, well, I was pretty shocked. But I soon forgot all about it and just continued on my Atari journey. That is, until recently, when I walked into a local game store and found a complete in-box 2600 copy for a mere $9.99. At that price, I figured it was worth checking out, and I was honestly a little bit curious about how well this game could convert from the 7800. So grab your beaks, strap on your wings, and join me as we're heading into the Egyptian Valley of the Kings in search of treasure in the 2600 version of Desert Falcon. Upon booting the game, I have to say that the menu looks comparable to the 7800 version. Obviously not exactly the same, but as close as a 2600 game can get. It's always impressive to see starting menus in 2600 games, as most just enter right into some sort of attract mode until you start the game. Anyway, Desert Falcon gives us the options for 1 or 2 players, and the option to choose our difficulty between Novice, Standard, Advanced, and Expert. Since I don't have any friends, I decided to do 1 player at the Standard difficulty. And after you make your selections, you're greeted with a whole lot of brown. The game does not give a great first impression upon starting, as, well, it looks ugly in my opinion. The title character doesn't look awful, but the background color was a poor choice, and there isn't a whole lot else to look at besides that. Our Desert Falcon does flap his wings convincingly, but so far, that's the only positive I have to say. And it might be one of the only positives, as when you start moving, you see that there is little going on here. You occasionally pass an obelisk, tower, or tiny pyramid, and enemies are far and few in between. And, well, the enemies don't look like much of anything if I'm honest. I was curious how they would be able to pull off the game's iconic, end-of-level Sphinx boss, and it turns out that they didn't pull them off very well. It looks like an outline that they pulled color out of in various spots to give it a little detail, and I think it was an effort to try to mimic the 7800 version, but it looks awful. I wish they would have gone for a different design or a different look rather than doing this. It's just ugly and shameful, but I guess it's on par with the rest of the graphics. So let's make a note about the audio here. I played this game on the 2600 Plus, and no matter what I did, I cannot get the audio to work. I don't know if this is a me issue or not, but there is sound on my 7800 and 2600 Junior. So I will comment about the audio, but be aware that there is none in this video because the 2600 Plus didn't output any. So the audio is pretty much the same as the 7800 version, with a few minor variations. You get the same start of the background music, but it sort of enters this weird little thing regularly that I don't remember from the 7800. The effects of your Falcon shooting and the enemy noises are all fine in my opinion, especially with what the developers had to work with. I think the sound our Falcon makes when he gets hit is a little too loud and jarring, but the rest is mostly fine. Well, except for the Sphinx. While I find the audio to be unique enough, it's just not great to listen to. That is to say, it gets on my nerves fast. All the more reason to quickly deal with the Sphinx and move on, but I wish the sound wasn't so abrasive. Overall, the audio is a ton better than the game's graphics, but it's time to move on to gameplay. After all, good gameplay can make an ugly game worth playing sometimes. But in Desert Falcon's case, well, I wasn't thrilled. I don't know, maybe I'm too jaded from the 7800 version, but I did not think that this one plays well at all. Your main enemy is an off-screen missile that will fly out to hit you. I understand that this version couldn't have all the enemies of the 7800, as that game throws a ton at you at once. But that doesn't mean I have to love what they did with the 2600 version either. Again, Desert Falcon on the 2600 is just lacking in the fun department. And it's going to take a while for most people to get the hang of it too. You push the joystick up to lift your birdie off the ground and take flight. He can change altitude higher or lower by pressing up or down again, and can even walk along the desert floor to pick up hieroglyphs and treasure. And then you push left or right on the stick to avoid a few obstacles that come your way. And some of the enemies feel, well, unavoidable at times, which isn't great. It's almost like they're too big and fast to avoid, especially when you're still getting the hang of the controls. But it's really hard to judge your altitude compared to the enemies in off-screen bullet. I think a lot of people have a hard time with this anyway, which is why these Zaxxon-style games is such an acquired taste. But this one is even worse than usual. The hieroglyphs that I mentioned earlier will give you temporary powers and abilities, but they mostly just hand out points. It seems that there is a lot less variety than what I find in the 7800. But since this version seems to be lacking a lot of enemies, I guess it makes sense. No need to have power-ups that clear the screen of a certain enemy type when they aren't present to begin with. So the game starts out a little too difficult, but occasionally the levels become a cakewalk. Too hard and then way too easy. Not a good difficulty curve if you ask me. And the Sphinx are incredibly difficult as you're right on top of them, and it doesn't work the way I thought it did. Your best bet in this battle is to stay to the lower right until the enemies and shots come out, and then try to hit his face immediately after they pass by you. If you miss, then move back to the lower right and start it all over. After this, you collect treasure and move on to a different colored level. And that's really it for Desert Falcon on the 2600. So the question is, was it time and resources well spent on the Atari in the 80s, or an unnecessary version of a superior 7800 game? Well, let's fly on over to the Atari Network pros and cons section and have a little chat about it. For the pros, most of the sound effects, well, they aren't horrible. I can't say the same for the Sphinx and the music, but whatever. The Desert Falcon himself looks pretty good and has a good flight animation. And I'm actually struggling to come up with more. The menu is pretty cool. I guess it's already time to move over to the cons, and I have a lot. The game itself starts out too hard, and then once you learn its secrets, it becomes way too easy. The Sphinx final boss is awful looking. And really, so are all the other enemies. As I already said, the music and the Sphinx sound isn't good either. And the Zaxxon-style gameplay is already an acquired taste, but this one is especially bad, as it's hard to gauge your enemy's altitude. I also have to mention that I couldn't get any audio to come out on the 2600 Plus. I'm not sure why, but I have to point it out. So with all that said, it's my unfortunate duty to give Desert Falcon on the Atari 2600 2 CX40 joysticks out of 5. The game isn't really broken, but it's just not any fun. It actually gets pretty boring after a while, and it's frustrating at the start. I really wish Atari Corp had put resources elsewhere, rather than having to port this game. It's just a bad 2600 game, and I recommend you play any of the other classics and hidden gems for the console, and try to ignore this one. Even for $10, it wasn't worth it. But now I want to hear from you guys. Have you played the 2600 version of Desert Falcon? Do you agree with what I had to say, or have I gone cuckoo? And do you enjoy the 7800 version if you played that one? Let me know about this, and more in the comments down below. And please, like the video and subscribe if you haven't. It helps the channel out a ton. Also, feel free to continue the discussion on the Atari Network Discord server. Lots of classy Atarians talk our favorite hobby over there, and it's free to join. Link in the description. And we have all new merch with our new and improved logo. That link is also in the description, if you're interested. Don't forget to check out Man vs. 7800 every other Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Pacific. It's like Saturday morning cartoons, except you're watching a middle-aged fat man play Atari games. So join us for the next one. It runs the opposite weeks of the Atari Network podcast. And last but not least, it's my pleasure to thank these classy Atarians who choose to support me and the channel on Patreon. They donate $5 a month to keep the Atari Network growing and going strong. In exchange, get behind-the-scenes updates, posts, exclusive audios, and more. Thank you all so much for the support. It means more than you'll ever know. Alright guys, I'm the 7800 Pro Gamer, a Desert Falcon in search of the Pharaoh's Fields of Treasure here at the Atari Network, and I'd like to thank you all for watching our review of Desert Falcon. And please remember to stay classy, Atarians.